I've given Park a lot of feedback on how to reword some questions. I encourage every teacher in this Commonwealth to do the same. All I have to do is email it to them. What I get back is that, well, that language is the language of the standards, of the new standards. And that is understandable on one level, but on the other level, you've got to come down to the reality of the kids. And that reality, there's a gap there, and we will overcome that gap in time, but it's going to take some time. And that's where, again, I urge patience on everyone's part. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I think from our perspective, the park, we did both online and paper assessments. Both of them were implemented fairly well. It was absolutely overwhelming for our principals and our proctors. It took way too much time, and I think the move for Park to move to combine the tests into a shorter test makes a lot of sense. The challenge, of course, is that going to give you enough good data to reliably measure and assess whether or not the kids know those essential standards? And that is a psychometric challenge that the Park folks have to deal with. I liked the idea of the PDA. I'm a big believer in project-based learning. We need more time for that, and we need more assessment tools for that kind of work for kids. I would be ashamed if the PDA was traded out for more multiple choice types of questions.
Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Susan Welke and Sam Krasowski. I will apologize, Susan Well. I don't get pronunciation help except when the commissioner leans over. Yeah, that's going to do that in your thing. So what did you begin? Thank you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Susan Weddle.
I know that.
And I, for 19 years, was the Director of Literacy and Humanities at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, where I worked on a number of curriculum frameworks, the development of a number of them, including the most recent English Language Arts and Literacy framework. And if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But I think one thing that you should know was that we were in the process of developing new English Language Arts and Math standards starting in 2007. And the work that we had done was folded into the development of the Common Core State standards. And then we proceeded to add uniquely Massachusetts standards to those. So that was the process of the standards that your board adopted 5 years ago. But I'd like to talk about some of the pieces of Park that haven't received as much notice yet, partly because they've been under development. But Park is committed to developing a number of resources to help out teachers. And we started out with what we call the Park content frameworks that were designed to introduce the standards and ways of working with them in curriculum development. That was the first thing. Following that, there has been the development over the last year of speaking and listening assessments, non-summative, designed to be used at will by teachers who wish to use them. I think this is a significant advance. We always had speaking and listening standards in Massachusetts, but we never really did much with them in MCAS. So I think these are going to be tremendous resources for us to use, as well as the diagnostic assessments that Park has developed. So these are some of the things that I think make Park a system that in some ways goes beyond what we've had in our very good standards and our very good MCAS tests. And then the third thing I'd like to say, from what I've witnessed over the last 5 years, is that we have deeply involved educators in Massachusetts in various aspects of park. I've worked for the past 4 years with a group that we call the Park Fellows. They are teachers from districts, from colleges and universities who have both reached out to their colleagues to explain what park is, what park isn't, to help out in a variety of ways to give feedback to park on various issues. And I've seen over the past 3 years in particular a much deeper bond between higher education and K-12 education working on these issues. This is something we've wanted for a long time. So I think park and the issues of park brought and new standards stimulated this. And I think whatever direction you go in, whatever you vote for, let's not lose that very important piece of thinking of the continuum from pre-kindergarten all the way up to college. So I'll turn it over to Sandy at this point, unless you have questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Sandra Stotsky, and I'm very pleased to have had an invitation to provide testimony, which I've written out because I know I have only 5 minutes, and that's not enough time to address all of the issues that need to be addressed. To begin with, I noticed what the department put out as 10 frequently asked questions, and I'm disappointed that their answers are all partial truths. I can't go into any of them because there's not enough time. But I have provided my testimony.
If you comment later, please feel free to send that to us.
If you ask questions about any one of them, I'd be happy to answer. I have provided testimony which does address most of them, but it would require people reading through the testimony. I've made it available on many sites because I happen to be a reader and a writer, so it's there. Most of the questions could be answered by the material I provided. But let me say first that I'm here not to validate a public hearing for a decision that has apparently already been made, but which few parents and other citizens know about. I say that, and I offer Appendix B in my written testimony, which I believe you all have a copy of. And I'm referring to Superintendent Lupini's letter to the Brookline School Committee in June 2014, indicating that the decision to go with Park had already been made. He's chairman of the State Superintendent Association. So apparently this was a done deal as far as he was concerned in 2014. I'm here, this is sort of a paraphrase of Julius Caesar, as you can understand, that low-income students in Massachusetts will not get a better education in ELA than they now receive, whether the state uses PARCC tests, which are based on Common Core standards, or continues to use MCAS tests, which are based on the 2011 Massachusetts ELA standards. The 4 designated lead writers for this 2011 document are not qualified to write ELA standards or a curriculum framework. They have no teaching experience with English. There are details in my testimony. The pre-Common Core and pre-2011 ELA standards, which were chaired by David Roach when he was a superintendent in Millbury, and the MCAS test based on those early standards did help to improve low-income student achievement, mainly because the tests were developed and revised by the state's English teachers. They also used paper and pencil. They were fully released to the public every year for inspection, and the state also set its own pass-fail scores. They were approved at the time James Pizer was the chair of the board. This is seeing faces in different positions at this point. These standards, the pre-Common Core and pre-2011 Massachusetts standards, and the test items for all of them up through 2007 can be found in Appendix A. I was able to find them all. Always ask for evidence for claims starting in 97. They asked for complex literary texts, for a division between informational and literary texts in grades 1 to 6. We were ahead of the curve in all respects, and we moved the needle for low-income students because of the focus on literary texts that the state's English teachers wanted. Their position was that this was the appropriate emphasis in a set of standards and in the tests. And there is a document available to show what the state's English teachers at that time voted for MCAS. But despite the improvement that we have seen for all students under the pre-2011 and Common Core standards and tests based on them, apparently the board, the commissioner, the Department of Education are committed to these standards, the current ones, to test based on these standards, which are supported by reports from organizations that have been funded by certain corporate interests, and I've spelled that out in my section of my testimony on the MBAE and Board of Reports. It should be clear what has been supported by one particular foundation, and people should simply have a skeptical eye about reports that are funded, or even fellows that may be funded by that particular foundation. Let me get to the content of the PARCC test, because that was to be one of the major focuses of this hearing. I spent hours looking at the sample test items. You have to understand that they're not released, so we don't know what the actual test items are. I've asked several times for permission to read them, couldn't get any permission to read the actual test items. All I have to go on, and I'm an academic researcher by training, are the sample or practice items. All I can tell you is that I was baffled by the format for Part A and Part B, the multiple choice questions, which may be what is being referred to by some of the superintendents and others here. The format drives what I would call a textual scavenger hunt in reverse. I can answer questions about it later. The problem with PARCC's multiple choice format exists in Smarter Balance as well, so there was coordination behind the scenes. It's not unique to PARCC. The questions in Part A and B are poorly worded, confusing, tedious, unfriendly to children, and cumbersome. The language the reading level of the selections overall, and remember I'm referring only to sample and practice items because I had no access to actual items. The reading level was at least one grade, if not more, behind in reading level compared to what had been in older MCAS test items. That's my area of expertise because I have studied under someone who was called misreadability. So I understand how to look at the reading level of literary selections or informational selections. And indeed, selections that are on PARCC for 10 and 11 can be found in grade 8 in MCAS years ago. This is a huge difference. Again, we don't know what's actually going to be on PARCC because it's been withheld from us. And we may never see them because they're in a computer. So my recommendation, which is at the end of my testimony, and I have a number of them, doesn't matter what you call the test. I'm not interested in the name. First of all, you should have fewer grades tested, maybe just 4, 8, and 10. We don't need more than that because we have teachers who know how to figure out whether kids can read or write. I know what
Hold on one
well-trained
second.
teachers.
So I'm ignoring the clock again.
Good.
I'm almost through. I have a minute left.
That's fine. I'm just going to admonish everybody here, we have to leave at 8. So if you want to lengthen it with applause or otherwise, I think it's disrespectful to the current speaker and those who would like to follow. Because I know there are many here and many who don't want to be heard, who want to be heard but won't be heard. So just sit on your hands as much as you can so we can get as much input as possible.
I'll speak fast.
Oh,
I think
okay. That was on me. That was my minute. I'll give you one more.
Thank you.
Sure.
First of all, we need a test that has a Massachusetts determined cut score, not a cut score across 9 states that includes states that really aren't at the level of what we're doing here in Massachusetts. We need test passages and questions chosen and reviewed by Massachusetts English teachers. We need tests that require less time for preparing for and teaching for the test. I've been speaking to teachers and kids. We need to retain the grade 10 competency determination for high school diploma, which was required in MERA for the benefit of low achieving kids. We need all or most test items released every year as MERA requires, so outsiders can actually see what their kids are being tested on. This is also important for teachers who I know in Massachusetts use these test items regularly to help their kids practice a little bit what was, and could tell what was needed in their classrooms. We need paper and pencil tests, not computer-based tests, and fewer grade levels tested, which is what I began with. 4, 8, and 10 is enough. That was what was in the 1993 MERA. It was also in the 1994 authorization of ESEA under the Clinton administration. Those 3 grade levels, one for each educational level basically, are enough to give us a handle on what kids need to know and how well they're doing, in addition to teachers' own observations. And I know that good teachers can tell whether a kid is reading or writing up to grade level. This is not a difficult thing if the teacher is trained appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. One question. Do you think we should do no online testing, that there's no computer-based testing that's suitable, or do you just have concerns about how it's implemented?
The costs are extravagantly enormous, and they're unnecessary. I'd rather put that money into teacher salaries.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, great. My name is Jim Pizer. I'm Secretary of Education. I apologize for being late. I have 2 questions. One is you talk about the reading levels being lower, and you cite a couple of examples from high school tests or a 10th grade test. We've heard testimony at the elementary level that seems to be the opposite, that the lexile levels of the passages and some of the words are too challenging or too far above the grade level being tested. Did you look at the elementary?
I looked at the elementary with respect to Park mainly, and the question answer format. I did not have actual test items. This has been the problem all along. I could only go with what was given as sample and practice items. What I could use were the old MCAS items because they're all released. So I know what we tested kids on. And I put in a few examples on one of the pages of my testimony because I do have plenty of note paper. I took down all these notes, but can't put all of that into 5 minutes worth. But for example, the Red Badge of Courage was tested at 10 or 11, and it was on an old grade 8.
So maybe now that the test has been administered, maybe you'll be able to see more questions. But it would be great to get your take on the elementary grades.
The elementary grades, though I didn't have the time to start checking, comparing reading levels. I had been on the grade 4 committee. So I knew what the reading level, by the way, was for grade 4 because I had helped to select the passages and had battles with the people on that assessment committee because we wanted a higher level of reading than some of the members on that committee. But when I looked at grade 3 for Park, the reading level is lower, However, the questions are more difficult, which raises a different question. How close does it become an IQ test at that level? When the questions are so cumbersome and difficult to understand. I spent hours trying to understand how to answer a grade 3. I called a few people to say I didn't understand why it was taking me that long to answer a grade 3 or 4 reading test. But the syntax of the questions was so difficult, I can't imagine what a young child would do. I wrote some of them down, I have them here.
Okay. So that'd be good to see. Also, again, if over the course of the next month or so, whatever, maybe if you have a chance to look at some of the, do some more deeper comparison on the elementary level, that'd be great.
If they would send them to me, I would have given them my advice. Jeff Nellhouse knows me well. If anybody had asked me for advice, it would have been given free. I've been giving my advice free for 6 years. And nobody asked for it. Jeff knew that. I always said I'd be happy to help out. I always have. I've answered every question for nothing. I don't need the money particularly. But I would give my advice to make sure that kids got a better test. But no one's ever asked for my feedback, and I've asked Don Hirsch, E.D. Hirsch, whether he's ever been asked, because I know him well, he's a literary scholar.
Well, I'm asking for some now. So,
And he's never been asked either for his advice, which puzzles me.
so I just asked the second part of the question. So you talked about the textual scavenger hunt. One of the features, if you will, that the authors of the PARC test talk about is the close reading of the texts that are offered, and that the assessment is designed to evaluate. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this approach to reading, this approach to textual analysis, and the extent to which it is sort of consistent with your sort of approach or perspective on how students should be taught to read.
I wouldn't want to say anything about how students should be taught to read a literary text, because there are disagreements among literary scholars. I'm only one of many, and I would leave it to a range of literary scholars. But the problem with Part D, and you have to really look at Part D in relation to Part A. Part A, not consistently, but often asks for an answer to a question that reflects the child's reading comprehension. You can't answer it unless you understood the passage. And what Part B does, which is why I called it a scavenger hunt after thinking about what was going on here, is that it asks the child to find the words, hunt for the words in the passage that formed the basis for the thinking that went into the reading comprehension in Part A, which is bizarre because it's got nothing to do with reading comprehension. You're simply finding words in the text. You know, find the paragraph, find the sentence. I give examples in here of a lot of the different in grade 3. Particularly. You know, I do it for every grade level, but there wasn't any way I was going to have the time for it. But Part B is what I find problematic. And I at one point wrote to Jeff and asked if there was a developmental psychologist who advised them. I don't know. There must have been some psychologist who thought this might have been metacognition as it's called, or critical thinking. I have no idea what it was, but it wasn't either. You're looking for words in a text that back up what you already understood. That was the basis for your understanding to begin with. It's bizarre. I don't understand it. It's not a reading test. And I wouldn't even call it a thinking test either. I mean, it's not either reading or thinking. I don't want to go on. It's just that I spent hours trying to figure out what was going on with Part B in relation to Part A. And it was on smarter balance, so obviously there had been some coordination. And somebody must think with some theory behind it that this is a way to assess kids. But I don't know. I called several people, some psychologists, cognitive psychologists. I know a lot of people in the academic field. And I said, show me the literature. What are the best studies on ADSC? I could get no help whatsoever. So unless I could speak to people in the testing company to find out where they got this theoretical framework from, I can't tell you what the reasoning behind Part B is in addition to Part A.
Thank you. Thank you both. We hear from three educators in Massachusetts classrooms, Eileen McQuaid, Liz Gonzalez, and Joseph Cleary. Please introduce where you're from.
Good evening. My name is Eileen McQuaid, and I'm the coordinator of ELA and Social Studies for grades 6 to 8 in the city of Brockton. I have a couple of themes that I'd like to bring forth during my 5 minutes. And one is that I think assessment is an important part of learning. I think that you can't know whether or not a child has learned unless you actually assess them and find out what it is that they do know and what they don't know, so that you can take the next steps with them to bring them along the whole grades K to 12 curriculum that they're supposed to get. So assessment is very important. And I also think that that it's important also for accountability in our profession. I believe that every child deserves an equal education across the country, and if we have a good assessment system that gives us information about whether or not that's happening, then I'm all for it. And then another thing that I have is I respect process. I think process is very important, and I can see that we're involved in a very difficult process. We're moving to an assessment system that is assessing, we can't even call them new standards, they're 5 years old. But for some people, they haven't moved towards them yet because we don't have a good assessment system in place. And so as long as PART continues to be a system that involves teachers in the process and superintendents and educators and parents, and listens to and responds to all of our concerns, then I would love to stay with PART. I see a lot of pros with PART. It includes rigorous tasks that students will need in college and career. It demands that they read closely and that they use their reasoning skills by providing evidence to support their claims. So I think that's what we were talking about with that A and the B. On previous tests, what they could do is they could say, I think that's the answer, but they weren't asked to really think about and reason, why is this answer better than another answer? I mean, where do we get these answers? We go to the text to find them. So I think that the Common Core is asking students to become better thinkers who can actually support their claims with evidence. I also think that it has better writing assessments, the decontextualized prompts from the long prompts from MCAS, where you had to just write for background information. I don't think gave us as good enough information, and I also don't think that's the kind of writing that students have to do in college and careers. So I like that PART is asking students to write based upon texts that they have read. I like that they include teachers in the process. Teachers have helped to design the test questions, score reports, parent-facing materials, for example. They've asked for student surveys and teacher surveys at the end of the test sessions to give teachers a voice. They have provided blueprints for the kinds of questions and prompts that will be on the test, so teachers can align their common assessments accordingly. I believe that after they determine what is an exemplary paper, or they get anchor papers, that they will be providing more of that information to us and releasing more test items so that we can better see and get our kids ready for that. So that's a really important thing that PART has to do for us, is to release test items. I do talk to teachers in park fellows who say in our state they never give us they never release the items, and I think that's crazy. Teachers need to see the items, teachers need to see anchor papers, and if we're going to move forward, that's something the park absolutely has to do for us. I like the fact that the park is timed, sitting all day long, watching a student just sort of look into space until 2 o'clock, with them pass, but those days are over. I like that it's on the computer, because no other initiative has pushed technology into our schools as much as Park has. Because it's on a test, we have schools that are increasing their wireless network capacity, and it's driven schools to provide access to devices and computers for more children in schools. It's also moved both teachers and students capacity to use technology every day in the classroom. I like that we're part of a consortium. I like that having students from many states take the test gives us more information about individual test items and helps us to ensure reliability of these test items. Being part of a consortium is also going to allow us to share best practices. The reason why we have the new Common Core in this test is because we're trying to close the gaps, and we're trying to make sure that students don't have to take remedial courses when they get to college. I like that the computer-based testing makes it easier to test our special populations in many instances. For example, the read aloud can be built into the computer instead of having that one-on-one, that we don't always have the staffing to do that. I like that it's being used by higher ed. It measures if students are ready for college and careers, not simply if they're ready to graduate from high school. College costs so much money, and they get out of high school, they go into college, and if they fail a course, if they're not ready, then they're behind, and they may not graduate on time. So those are all the things that I could think of, but I have some cons that I would like to address as well. I think the rollout was tough. I think that Pearson has to be, and even the state has to be more responsive to us. We need information in a more timely manner. We can't have things at the last minute. We're moving entire huge districts, and we need to get this information. For example, the accountability and administration manual, we had it all set. We were going to get all our teachers trained up in December, and then we were done. It was in the can. We were ready to get to the next week, and we said, "Oh, sorry, there's the third manual was the third version of that manual was coming out. We had to make changes." So that's just one example. Not knowing till November is tough for us, and it would be great if we could know earlier than that. And I know we probably can't, so maybe is there some way that we can have another year before we make this decision? The computer testing for our platform, it doesn't make active reading or annotation easy. Consider putting the text in a 2-column format first, so students can annotate, and then move the text to the left and the questions to the right after that. Because what they're doing is they see the question and it says in paragraph 9 and they're not reading the whole text. Just like in the paper test, give them that the text first, and then they can read and reread.
Can I ask you, I don't want to cut you off because you have pros and cons, but could you keep them tight then?
Yep.
Okay.
The box for the constructed response has just got to be there. Why is it this little teeny window? Kids can't see the entire essay, and so they're writing smaller amounts. So we need to have something more like a Word document. Also, teachers need more, students need more time to do the complex PDAs. I like that we have a shorter window and that Park is being responsive to our needs. I like that ELA is only going to be 3 units now. Thank you very much, responsive to our needs. But those PDAs have got to be given longer. A child's reading a text closely, answering questions, another text, answering questions, another text, and then having to write an essay in 90 minutes. It just isn't enough. We're really interested in them using those strategies and thinking deeply, which is what we want. And so finally, I just think that because of all the initiatives and all of this testing, and because we are in the process of building something and it isn't perfect yet, that maybe we can wait a little while before we use scores from Park for accountability.
Hello, my name is Liz Gonsalves. I'm the department head of English in Abington Public Schools for grades 7 to 12, a position I've held for the last 19 years. I'm also a teacher of sophomores and seniors and have been for most of my career there. I am a park fellow. I was extended the opportunity to work with the Department of Ed and Park to be a professional development provider. I was offered a seat in the front row, and I took it. I have participated in curriculum evaluation activities. I have reviewed passages that were selected, adapted, or rejected for Park. I have participated in discussions around bias, fairness, and sensitivity. We have rejected work and rejected items because they were not appropriate. Every person sitting around that table was a teacher. I would like to say that I've also been involved in item development. I've been shown items. I've been offered the opportunity to respond whether they were appropriate, could be modified, or needed to be rejected. I've responded to the syntax, and when it was inappropriate or ambiguous or oblique, I've been offered the opportunity to comment on how it can be made more efficient and more clear, because I have students in my classroom that I want to be successful. One of the things I do like about the standards is that we are still free to choose the appropriately complex work. Aside from a few foundational American historical documents, teachers at the local district can choose the texts. I think that's very important. As a teacher this year, I have taught Shakespeare, Don Quixote, Great Gatsby, short stories by Joyce Carol Oates and John Cheever, the poetry of Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman, as well as Petrarch. We have an arc of memoir in Abington. We teach Letter from Birmingham Jail. We teach the essays of the Transcendentalists and Massachusetts authors, all of which are placed appropriately in the curriculum. We've had to take Walter Dean Myers out of the high school and put him in the middle school. I'm very sorry, we enjoy teaching Fallen Angels, but it doesn't belong in a high school. Students need to have the staircase of complex texts, so when they get to college and go to that bookstore, the only sticker shock they have is how expensive their books are. Not that they have to read them independently, that someone's going to tell them what they need. They need to know how to be able to do that themselves. And unless we take off the training wheels, just like we do in MCAS, they have to hit a pitch they've never seen. We have been placing works before students so that they can transfer their skills and knowledge to write about prompts that they have not seen in advance. So what is in their bones? What do they know? Both assessments do this. But I would like to say that the long composition is the most flawed item in MCAS. It privileges students with wonderful memories and rich and varied experience. When my 10th graders sit down to write an essay about a novel they have read inside or outside of school, the one thing they're not allowed access to is that novel. That's ridiculous. And it doesn't prepare students to go to college where they have to back up their opinions. They don't have to worry about how many paragraphs something is, but if they adequately supported their point. And I believe these standards encourage teachers to provide that experience for students, and I believe this assessment, which is in process, does that. Like Eileen, we need to see models of student work. We need to see that rubric and learn how to calibrate scores. The best professional development the Department of Education in Massachusetts has ever provided was during the first 3 pilot years of MCAS, when teachers across the state were invited to score student work. We learned how to have common expectations across the state, and I honestly don't see what's wrong with doing that with our colleagues across the country. I also think the 10th grade test is too early. My sophomores think a D is for a diploma, and the only reason they think that is because 60 is a passing score. They're not ready for college. 1/3 of our Massachusetts students take remedial coursework in math and English. If they go to community college, it's 2/3. One remedial course means you're not finishing in 5 years. 2 means you might not finish at all. My students need that ticket to success, and this is a route to get there. Thank you.
When you and the other teachers were reviewing the items, providing feedback on grade appropriateness and syntax, and did you get any feedback on how that information was taken? Was it incorporated into revised items, or what?
We rejected some items as a whole. They were going back to the operational working group. The process for any item takes 2 years. So the items I saw were in year 1 of development. So I assume that they're going to be listened to and modified. I know that I saw passages that we had recommended modifications for, and I saw them again a year later, and they had been modified. I had seen items that we asked to have deleted because they were insensitive and unfair, and they were deleted. And I saw people make the changes in the testing bank while we were working. So I believe those have been made. I won't know until I see the tests. But the test items that we have on the practice test are almost 2 years old. I do think Park has been responsive by, for instance, closing the window. So I do think that our suggestions will be taken.
But when the items are released this summer from the operational test, I'd be interested to.
We'll be able to see that for sure, but we won't know until we see.
I'm Joseph McCleary. I'm the Executive Director of the Advanced Math and Science Academy Charter School in Melbourne. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board regarding the relative merits of Park and MCAS. I've been an educator for over 30 years, having taught grades 3 through university. My professional training includes a doctorate in English. I've also been the head of 3 charter public schools here in Massachusetts and held leadership positions in several independent schools as well, both here and in the Mid-Atlantic. I've administered both the Park and the MCAS testing and also served on the state committee that examined the ELA Common Core standards and made recommendations to the Board of Education in 2010. I have 3 points I'd like to make regarding the issue under discussion. One speaks to the curriculum content changes that are envisioned in the switch from MCAS to Park. The second concerns a successful track record of the MCAS testing put in place since the late 90s. And the third has to do with what I consider to be the historical duty of our schools to our students and families. The ELA content changes that will be in place with the implementation of Park are well known, I think. The chief architects of the Common Core ELA standards for Park have been quite clear in emphasizing the new Park test will prioritize nonfiction over literary study and so-called cold reading over informed contextualized reading. This represents a serious departure, in my view, from the emphasis on literature and rich context, which formed the basis for the MCAS, as they were based on the prior Massachusetts state standards for English. The reasoning put forth for this departure is that most workplace reading will be nonfiction, and students must be directly prepared for this to be successful in college as well as in life. This is a remarkably utilitarian emphasis that would have students examining text whose primary end is to achieve a practical purpose. These essentially rhetorical uses of language are instrumental in nature. All these purposes of writing are, of course, worthy motives and found throughout society. However, in the education of young people, it has been my experience that rich literary historical study is essential for a number of reasons. First, literature is language at its most elevated and complex form. The shades of meaning, the nuanced vocabulary, metaphor, analogy, imaginative expression all find their place in literary study. The training provided by this kind of study is the best preparation for reading any kind of text, including informational text devoted to more immediately practical uses. This is so because once a person has successfully grappled with literature, that student would have experienced language in all its richness and complexity, and naturally be prepared to understand less complex uses of language as well. Since language is integrated, as an integrated structure, experience with the most demanding elements naturally leads to a facility with the less demanding. Second, the study of literature is synonymous with the cultural literacy, in this context at least. The study of literature, plays, novels, poetry has formed a stable core of English studies for many decades in our nation's schools. The reason for this is quite naturally obvious. Literature is the highest expression of the humane ideals of a culture and the richest and deepest expression of the power of a language. With the possible exception of Mandarin Chinese, English has the world's largest vocabulary and is arguably one of the world's most influential languages. And by association, the world's most influential literary expression, if one includes the two major literary cultures of England and America. American literary writing has been what one scholar called the hospitable canon, welcoming and incorporating literary expression that has its roots in many other cultures as well. In Massachusetts schools, it is reasonable for parents and families to expect their young people to be given the opportunity to assimilate this literary heritage and gain all the advantages that this implies for their careers, as well as for their civic and personal engagement in life after school. In practice, we know that it is all too often the most disadvantaged who are deprived when ill-advised educational changes are made. Since time at school is limited, to diminish this opportunity is to do a grave disservice to many of our most vulnerable students. During the course of MPAS testing, the progress of our state schools has been remarkable. Beginning in 2005, the Commonwealth students have been first in the nation in every subject and at every grade level tested on the NAEP. In 2013, Massachusetts took part in the program for international student assessment, the BESE. A Massachusetts student outperformed their peers with the national average in reading as well as math and science. Historically, our schools have been seen as an indispensable help to families and parents in the intellectual formation of their children, with all that this implies. Good citizenship requires an educated citizenry with a strong command of language. This means having a vocabulary that is rich enough and complex enough to encompass not only practical uses, but above all, to enable each citizen to fully participate in the democratic process, both through speaking and writing. A good example would be what's happening here tonight. In addition, each citizen needs a full knowledge of the cultural antecedents that give rise to the current forms in American life. Almost done.
Okay, that's a shot clock, I think.
Without deep and coherent exposure to literary and literary historical study, a young person is ill-equipped to understand and contribute to the life of his or her society. And this brings me to the last item. A prominent feature of the proposed PARC testing and the underlying Common Core is the emphasis on the so-called cold reading of text, as opposed to a more richly contextualized study of literature. Common Core standards implement the reading of text in isolation. PARC tests would continue and deepen this approach. This is explained as a way to level the playing field for those students who may come to school without rich historical or literary knowledge to serve as a background for understanding new works. I would propose the real remedy for this situation is to give all students more exposure, not less, to a coherent literary curriculum which has enough depth to make everyone grow in knowledge. The more poorly prepared students catch up, and the more advanced students keep advancing. And I saw this actually come to fruition when I was head of a large charter school near Boston on the Malden Mystic Valley. Rather than resign ourselves to the lowest level of achievement, we would be able to then aspire to continue growing our Massachusetts students as the best in the country and the world. A few years ago, I read a book called Vernon Can Read. The author was Vernon Jordan, the counselor to presidents and a distinguished attorney, former president of the National Urban League. Jordan described his early years working in the home of a successful Atlanta banker who had hired him to work as his chauffeur. When the young Vernon had free time, he would sneak into the banker's well-stocked library and read his literary and legal volumes. One day he was discovered by his employer and was asked quite abruptly why he, a young black man, would be interested in reading any such books. In fact, the employer was even surprised that his young employer could read and exclaimed to the others, "Vernon can read," that's the title of the book. In Massachusetts, we can make sure that future students of whatever background will be able to access the best of our literature and have successful careers by continuing on the successful course that has already brought us thus far and given us so much progress. I think keeping our proven curriculum and assessment system is an indispensable step in doing this. Thanks.
Thank you all for sharing your experience. Very much appreciated. Thank you. If you left anything out again, please submit the written version for us. All right, we're going to hear next from three representatives of higher ed: Anna Bradfield, Casey Kaminsky, and Peter Johnson, please. If anyone from the public, whether you're called on or not, has written testimony, please make sure that it gets to our staff in the front row so it will get shared with the full board. Good evening.
Good evening.
You can also email if you'd like on our website.
Good evening, Secretary Conser, Commissioner Chester, and members of the board. My name is Stacey Kaminsky, and I represent the Connect Partnership. I have extremely brief comments to make this evening because most of the people that have already spoken this evening have shared a lot of the sentiments that I was planning to share with you. So I'll be extremely brief and then defer to my other higher ed colleagues. As I said, I'm the Executive Director of the Connect Partnership, which is a consortium of the 5 public colleges and universities in southeastern Massachusetts, including Bristol Community College, Bridgewater State University, Cape Cod Community College, UMass Dartmouth, and also Massasoit Community College, In addition to these 5 institutions, we have over 80 public school districts within our catchment area, the majority of which have established relationships with our institutions, either through educator prep programs or through continuing ed experiences throughout the community that we serve. As a consortium, we serve frequently as a convener of regional stakeholders, including higher education faculty and public school educators. Throughout the 2014-15 academic year, Connect has convened teachers and professors representing the educational continuum to discuss collaboratively and collegially the contemporary curriculum content shifts and subsequent assessments, as well as their impact on our student outcomes, particularly as they pertain to the Massachusetts definition of college and career readiness. Massachusetts Curriculum Frameworks 2011, which are used with the Common Core state standards, reflects transformative curriculum shifts which impact all educational domains, including pre-service and in-service educators. Recognizing the need for authentic collaboration between and among the educational sectors as a conduit for student success, the Connect Partnership assembled educators to critically examine and analyze the sample assessment items. During these meetings, faculty and educators who serve students grades 3 to 12 discuss the rigor of the items, as well as the necessary curriculum shifts to support these enhanced learning tools. Educators specifically discuss math and ELA assessment content and how best to prepare students to meet the new challenges. In future workshops, we hope to convene teams to examine student writing samples and assess them with mutually developed rubrics between both faculty member groups. We found this enhanced collaboration between public school educators and higher ed faculty to be mutually beneficial, as Susan Weddle commented on earlier, and the foundation for many essential future conversations. We look forward to convening more educators throughout our catchment area in the upcoming months to discuss the impact of our collaborations on student performance and outcomes. Thank you very much for your time.
Good evening. My name is Peter Johnson. I'm Dean of Academic Advising and Assessment in High School Outreach at Massasoit Community College. I'd like to share a brief story about college readiness and make a couple of observations about MCAS and PARCC as they relate to college readiness, which is really my primary concern when it comes to outcomes testing in the high school level. At Massasoit, we work very closely with our feeder high schools around the issues of college readiness. A lot of that focuses on the placement process, primarily the hector basic test for math, which has been very, very challenging, and a holistically scored essay for writing. A couple of years ago, we had a group of high school faculty and staff in at Massasoit for a meeting. One of the guidance counselors there spotted one of the students, excused himself from the group, said, I see my student over there, great kid, a solid B student, good MCAS scores, good work ethic. She's going to be a star in college. Let me just go and chat with her. He came back after about 5 minutes and he was just crestfallen. It seemed that the young woman had tested into non-credit classes in reading and writing and math. And he said, well, let's look at the bright side. You're probably going to start off with all A's. And she said, no, actually these classes are tougher than what I was doing in high school. And then she looked at him and said, you were supposed to prepare me for college. You didn't do your job. And then the guy says it, and I know him well, he's a wonderful guy. This is not Brockton High, by the way, but I don't think the issue was that he wasn't doing his job, or the high school not doing its job, or high schools around the Commonwealth are not doing their job. We have a 10th grade competency test as our high school exit criteria, and we're surprised that many kids who pass that test, in fact, don't do well on college placement tests. This gave you the numbers that roughly a third of our high school graduates are starting off in non-credit classes when they go to college. At community colleges, it's closer to 2/3. And that's the it's about 70%. And our incoming students need some developmental courses. The lack of alignment, the lack of preparation is certainly a much bigger issue in math than it is in reading and writing. 2/3 of our students need some developmental math. It's roughly 28% in reading and 20% in writing. I see two issues with MCAS which limit its usefulness as a measure of readiness for college and career. And I think both of the weaknesses are addressed well through Common Core and through PARC. The first is just this issue that MCAS wasn't designed to be a measure of college readiness. Common Core, by contrast, was developed as a partnership between K-12 and higher ed. They really started with a definition of college and career readiness. They sought to build in the type of analytical thinking, and critical thinking, which is the norm in college classrooms. Interest in the conversation about the two-part questions on PARC. If you ask our English faculty, what do your students struggle with in writing, what don't they do well, they don't write from sources, they don't incorporate sources. They state general arguments and they have a difficult time backing that up. When our English faculty looked at that PARC reading test, they said, gee, that's what those PARC B questions are seeking to do. Don't just give us what is your understanding, just what is your understanding based on? Can you back that up? When you look at the writing samples in MCAS, which are sort of that decontextualized, you're not referring specifically to a text. Whereas the PARC, those are all text-dependent types of writings, the types of writings that they're doing in the college classroom. PARC is looking at a lot of nonfiction writing. In college, we read literature, we read social science, so we read science. And we write about social science and then science. To me, the notion that we would test students on that makes a lot of sense. The other issue, which I think is really, really key, is that we have two very, very different systems of assessment. So K through 12, I think, has really been told your job is to get everybody through MCAS, to get everybody to that high school level. Our college placement is a totally separate process. It happens at a different time. Most kids who do a fair amount of early active placement testing are at high schools, but most kids take the placement test in the summer after they graduate from high school. And so this student who was surprised to find out that she needed these developmental classes, that's very much norm. But her high school teachers don't know that. I did a workshop, a PARC workshop in the fall, mostly with high school people, and I asked how many of you know how your district is doing in terms of MCAS scores. Every hand went up, everybody knows how they're doing. And I asked, do you know how your students are doing in terms of testing into credit-bearing classes in college? Nobody knew. So, I submit to you that if we were designing a comprehensive assessment system from scratch, we would go through a very similar process to what PARC is doing. We would make sure that we were referencing college-level skills and the specific kinds of skills that colleges are looking for. We would start with college readiness. We would map that backwards with age-appropriate benchmarks to get to that level so that we would not be surprised. I don't think that a different test would remove the need for remediation, but we should never be surprised that a student really is struggling and needs that sort of stuff. So, Massachusetts clearly is an actual leader in K through 12. I think we've done a good job. I think MCAS needs more. As a community college guy, I really like that focus on everybody. We need to teach all of our kids and raise the bar for everybody. But we still have too many students who are starting off in non-credit classes. I think that the combination of common core state standards and art would address that weakness pretty well.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Anna Bradfield, and I live here at Bridgewater State University. I am currently the executive director of the University Initiatives here. I was the former dean of college education for 10 years. I'm going to take just a very short period of time to talk to you about the very seriousness that our colleagues at our state universities and colleges take with our relationship around the Common Core State Standards, the new and the curriculum frameworks based on those state standards, and the adoption of whatever assessment ends up being the assessment of those standards. Since the adoption of 2011, Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, there has been a strong partnership between the educator preparation programs, partner schools and districts, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and the Department of Higher Education to assure that faculty and candidates in preparation programs in the 8 state colleges and universities approved to licensed teachers have knowledge of and use the approved frameworks and, in the future, the approved assessments in curriculum, development, delivery, and assessment. To underscore this, the Council of Presidents charged the Pittsburgh President Robert Antonucci and Sue Lang at the Department of Higher Ed to assure that the Common Core State Standards were incorporated into the educator preparation curriculum across our system. We have held multiple events that involve both K-12 and higher ed faculty to assure that this has occurred. While the structure and the timing of the PARCC assessment system is undergoing change, as the Commonwealth and other PARCC states look at its validity and administration, the intent to provide information that assists teachers and schools with improving teaching and learning remains the same. In addition, district-wide valid and reliable optional diagnostics are encouraged. This type of assessment assists teachers and candidates in understanding progress over time of their students and allows for modification of instruction to address students' learning needs. It is the relationship of the new frameworks that assures that PARCC will assist teachers and leaders in assisting college students to be college ready. We want our candidates in the teacher ed programs to be able to walk into school and ensure that they can be a partner in this process. Finally, the evaluation of the knowledge and teaching proficiency of candidates in our educator preparation programs prior to licensure is now based for teachers in the 2014 Professional Standards for Teachers using the Teacher Performance Assessment. The TPA is also aligned with the new Massachusetts Educator Evaluation Framework. This will prepare candidates to evaluate their performance as it will be evaluated once they become employed. The evaluation of administrators has been changed also to a new set of professional standards and for administrative leadership and school administration. What is particularly pertinent about that Common Core State Standards in PARCC is that both of these evaluations, and for both teachers and school leaders, the evaluations and the standards require proficiency in the use of student data for decision making. The better student data that we have, the better the teachers can teach, and the better the administrators can guide their schools in order to make them the best learning environment for students. In closing, I would just like to say that we have found this relationship, as both Susan Wells said, and then our colleague is now involved in our two colleagues, that whether it was because of Common Core Standards in the new frameworks or PARCC or whatever, the relationship that we have developed with our partners in K-12 so that we truly do have a pathway to college has been remarkable for all of us, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you all, and again, thank you to you and President Korea for hosting us and for feeding us and offering food to the visitors. Some people didn't come to all of our hearings. Not everyone treated us so nicely. We were sending out to the vending machines in the middle of 5-hour hearings, so thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry we got to push out today, but we got another coming.
That's okay. We understand. Thank you. Thank you all.